I love to swim. It's one of my favorite things to do. On top of that, I love finding places that are a little more unusual to take a bath in. So, not pools or lakes or the ocean. I prefer rivers and swamps and springs, places that can be found off the beaten track. Now, of course, I know these places can tend to be dangerous. I'm a very competent and strong swimmer, but I don't fancy my chances against a gator, so I'm not dumb. I have seen all sorts of weird stuff in those rivers and swamps. Even once found a body. Didn't stick around too long after I noticed it was a human swaying against the current. I dialed 911, and I was out of there. Turned out to be some poor runaway. At least the parents got closure, and the body buried. You think that would be the worst thing I've ever seen, right? Well, it isn't. One day, I was out deep in Louisiana swamps, and I saw something that utterly blew my mind. As I said, I like to find hidden, unique away places to take a dip, but I'm also careful not to end up as some croc's dinner. Well, in and around, you gotta be careful. Snakes are dangerous too. I've seen some of them crawling around near the water, and a damn side bigger than I am. So, when I found this stretch of water, it was like some offshoot from the bayou. I did all my usual checks and balances before I even put a foot. I couldn't see any obvious signs. I stuck a long stick in the water, swirled it up real good, and no long slithering body surfaced. So, I thought I was safe. I got in, feeling that immense pleasure that I get from knowing I'm maybe the only person around here. As I'm slowly swimming around, feeling pleased with myself and very smug, I instantly get the sensation when you know somebody or something is looking at you. I could feel these eyes boring into my back. Also, I'm used to some funky smells hitting me when I'm out there in these waters, especially the swamps, where stagnant mud gets all swirled about. But this was awful. Like a damn stank, like I was on a pig farm, and they'd been rolling around in their own feces all day. I turned around, real slow-like, as I don't want to spook whatever's behind me, just praying real hard that it wasn't no gator. If I told you that finding a human foot was like finding Santa had been on Christmas morning compared to what I now saw in the water, that might suggest to you just how much fear I was experiencing. It weren't no gator. Well, not any kind of gator like I've ever seen. It was bigger than me, and was standing in the water. The river wasn't that deep. If I was to stand, my feet on the ground, it would likely come up to my waist. The thing in front of me must have been real tall, as the water barely covered where his groin is. It was real strong looking. Its torso was like that of an alligator or reptile, but if you flipped it onto its back, all scaly but real ripped and muscly. It did have human-like arms, dangling from the side, rather than little gator limbs, although its hands looked like they were webbed and clawed. It had a long, thick neck. Again, I could literally see the muscles throbbing, like some bodybuilder on steroids. And then finally, the head. Now, it didn't have a regular alligator-looking head. Like anything, nothing about what I was looking at was normal in any way. The head resembled more of a lizard, or a snake. Large bulbous shapes, with no visible nose or ears. Just two large yellow eyes, and a large forked mouth. Tons of tiny sharp teeth. It just stood there, standing its ground, not moving closer to me, but not backing away further. I really thought I was a goner. I kind of got the hint that it was contesting its ground. Maybe somebody would be finding my dismembered body floating around in the water. That's if this thing didn't just decide to devour me whole, So, you know what I did. I screamed, as loud and powerful as I possibly could. I screamed and screamed, like I doubt I had since I was a preschooler. I think I might have freaked it out. Whether it didn't like the frequency, or being afraid made me scream like a girl, or how loud it was, I guess looking back I'll never know. But the more noise I made, it seemed like it was getting really annoyed or pissed. It quickly moved out of the way and into the nearby brush. I stayed there for a few moments longer, catching my breath, and then hoping I was about to die of having a damn heart attack, having survived a freak encounter with a reptoman. Thankfully, I managed to muster up some strength from somewhere, and I too ran out of the river and back to my car, where I didn't even bother changing, just drove home in wet clothes and wet shorts. Don't feel like I scared it off. I think I merely irritated it. It didn't seem too happy about me yelling and screaming and making noise. It seemed irritated, if I had to guess its proper demeanor. Now, why it went off to the bush to my left, I don't know. Part of me likes to think that it was circling around in the brush to come and grab me from behind. But I don't know, because once it exited into the brush, I couldn't hear it anymore. So, that means it could have been possibly waiting to trap me, or even worse, take me away and kill me. We were the first small town in our state to have a nuclear power plant constructed within the town limits. We were told that it was supposed to just be big enough to power us, and they wanted to see what the long-term impact of a nuclear power was on a smaller community. My parents being hardcore environmentalists, and they opposed it from the first whisper of it, which was well before I was ever born. So, it's been around for a long time. I've been paying attention to how my parents felt about the whole thing, and I had also been listening to everybody else's side of the story. This was also the time when just about every phone now had a video camera in it, so it wasn't a stretch of the imagination when I got the notion to go and try and make a documentary about the plant. I didn't share my plans with my parents, because they would have forbidden me to go anywhere near that place, treating it like Chernobyl. I didn't want to be too obvious about what I was doing, so I took the shirt that I was planning on wearing, which was just a denim button-up shirt that had plenty of pockets on the front, and I modified one of the pockets so there would be an opening where the lens of the camera could see out. It wouldn't be a fully unobstructed vision, but it would be better than having the thing out in the open where everybody saw what I was up to. I didn't think anybody in that place was expecting a 17-year-old kid to just walk in and interview people. Everybody was looking at each other, as if this was their first time ever dealing with anybody outside. I politely asked every single person I saw that I would like to speak to whoever ran the place, since I was doing an interview for a personal project. I held a notepad to draw my attention away from the camera, and just like that, the director of the entire facility was paged to come and see me. I remember him being pleasant enough, as far as first impressions go. He had invited me up to his office on the 4th story. He put me at ease and asked me how much he could help me. I told him what I was up to. It was a very pleasant exchange. So, after everything was done, I put the SD card of my phone into my laptop and reviewed the footage. It was remarkable high quality, and the field of view was all but entirely unobstructed. But the longer I watched, the more I saw that I did not remember. The director smiling far less than I remember. Instead, he had this glassy, intense stare. When he sat with me for his interview, his eyes transformed, like having long slit pupils, and his skin looking pale and slightly scaly in appearance, whispering something bizarre under his breath. After those mutterings, I wordlessly got up and marched at a slow pace outside the building on my way back home. There had never been an interview based on what I saw. After going through the footage, There was no actual interview at all. I just sat down with him, and he muttered at me. After studying the footage where he was saying those strange things under his breath, when his eyes transformed, I couldn't help but remark at how much he looked kind of like a snake or serpentine. He definitely resembled something that was cold-blooded. I don't know if what he did to me was hypnoticism or something else entirely, but I just know that it somehow created false memories in me while wiping on others. What's your take on this? And I'm curious what your listeners would think of this. Not to be presumptuous to think that you would actually broadcast my story, but if you do, I appreciate it. I'm sure there are others like me that have very similar experiences with possibly similar beings and would like to feel validated. Thank you for even taking the time to read this. I was wandering around the woods, a much older growth of oak trees that had seen times long gone by. So, many of the trunks were massive, and many of them were also hollowed out. I was leaning up against one of them, listening to the subtlety of the breeze, when I thought I heard something stirring. It wasn't a scraping sound like you'd expect from the claws of an animal, but somehow softer and more wet. After my curiosity took hold, I started looking for an opening, which wasn't hard to find. This was a large open gash where a cavity had formed over the centuries. There was something that looked akin to the egg sac of a spider, except it was much larger. I usually don't go out of my way to disturb nature, but I couldn't leave this alone. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like it. I took out my pocket knife and began making slight cuts. At first, I thought I discovered the abdomen of an incredibly large baby spider, but the abdomen turned out to be the head of something else. Combine the features of an iguana and a chameleon and a snake, and give it human-like eyes, and that's as best as I can describe what was suspended. After a few seconds, this thing's eyes shot up and looked at me. A deafening shriek from behind me made me jump back and stop what I was doing. Something much taller than I, much uglier than me, and yet vaguely resembling the small thing I had just seen in the tree, stood only 3 meters away, leaning forward with its spine parallel to the ground, hissing at me, revealing tons of vicious crocodile-like teeth. I'll always remember that as terrifying. It's a sight that has never left my memory. I immediately stepped away from the tree, and this creature, whatever it was, took the opportunity and lunged forward, doing what I believe bluff charged me. It had the ability to kill me, but chose not to for some reason. I took that as my cue to get the hell out of there, not even looking behind me in case this thing was coming after me. I paid it no more mind. Anyway, I wanted to send my encounter into you, in hopes that someone else has heard something similar, or maybe you have gotten other stories with a similar finding. I feel like mine's a little out there, but nonetheless, just as terrifying.